Good morning. It is 10 till 3 a.m. in the morning. And welcome to another episode of Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. So I'm sure I'm not out of line when I say every one of us has something from our past that's really dug in there like a big old tick. It's just there. It's cuts deep down to your core. It could be maybe a movie or a book that you've read, maybe some music. Something that you experienced probably as a child, as a young kid, and that carried over up into your adult life, and and that experience forms the basis of your beliefs, your notion of right and wrong, maybe your fears. And for me, it was a movie I saw as a kid. I was 11 in 1978. That is still with me today. The movie itself is largely forgotten, but I remember it. And it is responsible for my core beliefs. You know, I have an inherent mistrust of hospitals and doctors. And I think a lot of that comes from this movie that I saw as a kid in 1978. I used to work at a hospital. I worked on their computers, their PCs, their printers, and what have you. And the whole time I worked there, I always felt like there was conspiracy all around me. It's just my imagination, and I have a big imagination. But I always imagine there's things going on behind closed doors, conversations, maybe where my name is being brought up, but I'm not privy to listening to. People looking out of heavily tinted windows, seeing nothing. And every twist and turn and craggy corridor of this place was just reeking with unwanted eyes and conspiracies. And almost all of that came from the movie Coma from 1978. So we turn back the clock a bit, back to the 70s. I was 11. My sister, I have one sister, and she was 9 years older than me. So if my math is holding up, when I was 11, she was 20. Just starting her college journey at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. But even still, even though she'd graduated from high school, she had her familial duties to attend to, and one of them was looking after my ass in the summer, and she resented it. And man, the moment Mom and Dad's back was turned, the moment they got in the car and chugged down the street, I was in for it. I sucked. I was the root of all evil. Well, you know, core, I wasn't that bad. I was a good kid. All the guilt that you heaped on me was misplaced. And it could be said that instead of you being stuck with me, I was stuck with you. And we've put all that behind us. I'm really close with my sister. She's really cool. But still, there was a couple years of ugliness there that every so often bubbles up to the surface. Anyways, so my sister's, I don't know if it was her first or second year of college, to earn a little scratch, she was working at the local movie theater. One picture, one screen, that was it. And that was the norm back then. We didn't have the super mega movie plexes like we have today. One mid-sized theater, and that was it. And it reeked of cigarettes because you were allowed to smoke pretty much anywhere you wanted. And since my sister was in charge of me, she usually brought me to work with her. And this was possible because, as I said, I was a good kid. I didn't make mischief. I didn't hang out with a bad crowd. I was a good, compliant kid. And I would just go and sit in the theater pretty much all afternoon, watching the same movie roll over and over. My introduction to Star Wars came during this phase of my life. Star Wars was making the rounds, and when it came to the theater where my sister was working, I saw Star Wars probably 50 times. And I could say with good confidence, Star Wars probably saved my life. Why? My teachers, during the dreaded parent-teacher conference, were very concerned about me. They're like, Mr. and Mrs. Garcia, your son, while seemingly bright, isn't really all that bright. He's falling behind. He's not keeping up. He can barely read. And this doesn't have anything to do with the teaching techniques we have applied to him. It's his fault. There's something wrong with his brain. We don't know what it is, but we're certain we have locked down this problem, and it is his brain, your son's brain. It doesn't work. He, for lack of better terms, is an idiot. We just thought you'd like to know that. Ta. And we have a school-approved child psychologist that we'd like you to take your son to. And so they took me to this place, and I still remember I had to strip down into my undies, and I was wearing like little tighties with race cars on them. And why I had to get naked is beyond me. But everyone else was dressed except me. And there I am in my race car tighties. And this psychologist, he kind of looked like a more sinister Bob Ross. He had a big old white guy afro and a big cheesy mustache. And did a few tests, made me... I don't know, I remember walking a line while I was naked. I don't remember why, but... And he goes, your son seems cognitively like he's all there. He doesn't seem like he's a total dumbass. He seems like he has a spark of wit, but something deep down is keeping him from concentrating. And you're in luck. This is your lucky day. We have a brand spanking new medication that we'd like to experiment. Use on your son, and it's called Ritalin. The fact that it's a mind-altering drug, don't worry about that. It's gonna work wonders, trust me. And so I went on Ritalin for at least a year, and during that time, I didn't grow an inch. And I just remember every time I would take it, it felt like there were lightning bolts like going through my brain. It was like, it's the Ritalin, it's the Ritalin. And I don't remember it having any significant effect other than that. Now here's my brain, Ritalin, shocked the hell out of it. But then came the summer of 77, and there I am at the theater where my sister worked, watching Star Wars. And I remember coming out of the theater in tears. And my sister's like, why are you crying? And I said, because I couldn't see Darth Vader. He was just a blur upon the screen. And she's like, what? I couldn't see him. So a couple light bulbs went off. My sister tells my folks. My folks are like, I couldn't see Darth Vader. I wonder why. And they took me to an eye doctor. And sure enough, I can't see shit. I'm total bad nearsighted. I was half blind, and nobody knew it. And I had been placed on mind-altering drugs for about a year, and nobody ever thought to go, hey, can this kid hear? Can he see? Oh, the basics. No, we're just gonna jump to the mind-altering drug part. I should be over 6 feet tall. God damn it. And instead, I had my growth stunted by this foray into my alleged psychosis. But anyways, so Star Wars, Darth Vader got me a pair of glasses, and then this film, Coma, is the first film I ever saw that I could actually see. I could see what was happening on the screen. Like, whoa, I can see it. It's so crystal clear. It's so awesome. That's amazing. So, this film is a personal first for me. And just like with Star Wars, I saw Coma probably at least 50 times. Usually 4 or 5 times a day. Well, probably not that many. Maybe 3 or 4 at the most. I saw it a lot. And they even had the little theater all dressed up with these cardboard cutouts, like, on the book they had like a kind of stylized naked person hanging from strings, and it was that person that was hanging from the ceiling by strings. And I remember my sister brought one home when the run ended, and I just remember it reeked of cigarettes, and I thought it was kind of creepy too. But so Coma, based off a book by Robin Cook, who was a doctor, and that gave the whole movie some credibility. And the movie was directed by Michael Crichton, who was also a doctor. And so this wasn't like watching General Hospital, where you have a bunch of actors in lab coats really doing nothing that a doctor might actually do. This film actually sounded like it knew what it was talking about. It actually sounded like doctors talking amongst each other, about with medical procedures and different types of treatment, different types of sickness and what have you. It went into the structure of a hospital, how you have different services, you have different chiefs of services, and unlike what you see on TV like CSI, where they're just a jack of all trades, doctors are very specialized and really only do one specific thing, and then you have another doctor doing another thing, and all of them meshing together completes your medical experience, your treatment experience. And that movie, Coma, actually displays that. You have your surgeons, and your surgeons are not anesthetists, and the anesthetists are not surgeons. There's nobody who's a Renaissance man. Everyone has their job, and they know their job, and that's their area. And you actually see that in the film. And it stars Genevieve Bujold, that bird-like French-Canadian actress. And I always thought she had an unusual accent. It's not really treated upon in the film, but she's got she's French-Canadian, so she has a bit of an accent. But nobody really touches on that. And she is the heroine. She is the star of the show. She's the main character, the main protagonist. She's the one who uncovers the various conspiracies in the movie. She's the one who wouldn't take no for an answer. She's the one who gets results and uncovers the nefarious doings. And for 1978, for a lady to be doing these things was a bit unusual. Her co-star, Michael Douglas, right out of the streets of San Francisco, you would assume Michael Douglas would be doing these things. But no. It was Genevieve Bujold. And you know what? You know what? In our current situation, we're so secular, we're so polarized, we're so compartmentalized. Everything is like, well, we have a lady and she's Jewish and she's gay. What boxes does this character check off? We've segregated ourselves into little areas, and none of that occurred to me back in 1978. I was just watching a movie with a lady protagonist who I cared about and who I was rooting for, and it didn't occur to me it was a lady. It meant nothing other than she was the star of the show. And she is a surgical resident at the Boston Memorial Hospital, a very large, Gothic-looking hospital, just from the brief shots you see of it at the outside. And she is overworked and stressed out, just like any surgical resident might be. And she's got an affair going on with Michael Douglas, who is also a surgical resident at this hospital. He's much more in tune with the political comings and goings of the hospital. He has his sights set on the chief resident, or the chief residency. He wants to be, and he's really into the politics, who's rising, who's falling, who's a member of who's a name in Boston society, and so on. And Jean B. Bujold couldn't give a shit. She's like, that's politics, and I don't care. And you can tell they have a very contentious relationship right off the bat, because they come home after who knows how long their shifts lasted, probably a couple days, because they're residents. And she gets in the shower and she's naked, and they have an argument, and she leaves. And she accuses him of not helping out and being a chauvinist. He accuses her of wanting a wife. And that begins the thread in this film of Michael Douglas. The character he plays, his name is Mark Bellows. And you're left wondering, is he a good guy or a bad guy? As the movie progresses, that question gets asked more and more. It's like, whose side is he on? And to let off some steam, to wash away some of the hospital, Jean V. Bujold, Dr. Wheeler, Dr. Susan Wheeler, that's her character name, I don't know if I've said it, takes a class with her best friend, Nancy Greenlee, played by the hot Lois Chiles, a Bond girl in Moonraker. And okay, I realize Moonraker has its problems. It's a little silly, but I absolutely love Moonraker. Okay, Roger Moore is my favorite Bond. Sean Connery can go fuck himself. Timothy Dalton was just a blip. Pierce Brosnan's pretty cool. And Daniel Craig's, he's okay. But Roger Moore was the Bond I grew up with, and he's the one I identify with, and he's the one that I love. And Moonraker was like the antithesis of a Bond movie. It was big and dumb and stupid and completely unrealistic, even though it was branded as technology that exists today. And I don't think they actually have laser fights in space today or back then either. But I don't care. I love that film. It's my favorite Bond film. Fuck off. Anyways, Lois Chiles is her best friend, Nancy Greenlee. And she's kind of nickel and diming her with questions because she's having a procedure coming up where she's pregnant and she doesn't want her husband to know, so she's going in to have a therapeutic abortion. And she's kind of nervous, and Dr. Wheeler, Jean B. Bujold, is like, well, you'll have nothing to worry about. You'll see. I can't do her accent, so I'm like, sorry. You don't be worried. It's a routine procedure. And so she goes in and has her therapeutic abortion, and you get treated to some of the ins and outs of modern anesthesia, which is pretty cool. And to the layman, it sounds like they know what they're talking about. How you prep the blood, and then you have to induce with gas, and you check the pupils, make sure everything is good with the old brain, with the flashlight, make sure they're moving. And then the abortion begins. And a few minutes into it, she starts having cardiac irritability. She's throwing what they call a PVC, and her blood pressure starts dropping. So, like, what the hell? And then it stabilizes, and they're like, okay, whew, that was scary. But then, once they try to bring her up, she won't wake up. Check her pupils again, and they're fixed and dilated. They're like, whoa, her pupils are fixed and dilated. Or, she's fucked. So she's basically brain dead. Her body is fine as long as she's on a respirator, but her brain is gone bye-bye. It's a bye-bye. She's done. And later, Michael Douglas, Mark Bellows, sees her in recovery and overhears them talking about her situation and how she's brain dead. And then he goes and he knows she's the best friend of his lover, Dr. Wheeler. So he has her paged. And this is where the film really is out of date. There's nothing that becomes obsolete faster than technology. What is cutting edge today is the butt of a joke tomorrow. And so he has her paged, and Dr. Wheeler has this giant beeper that she wears, and it's like the size of a small cattle prod, and all it does is beep. There's no screen to look at, no liquid crystal display. It's just a giant beeper. It just beep, beep, beep. And then she's got to go find a phone and call the message center, and then they speak out what her message is. That's how they rolled in the 70s. Anymore, he would have just texted her, "Hey, friend dead. Details later. Love, Mark." So she gets beeped, and she goes in there, and she sees her friend essentially dead, but still alive. And at first, she's very empirical, very forensic, and she's looking at her chart, and she's going over the risks of telephane anesthesia, and that's every so often a healthy patient just never wakes up. It's the risk of modern anesthesia. But you can tell she's deeply affected. Her best friend is brain dead, but she's trying to gloss over it with a lot of hokum and nonsense. But all that starts to come up later, where how she's in grief for her friend. Who wouldn't be? I would. And Michael Douglas is even like, hey, this isn't just a patient. This is your friend. She meant a lot to you. Tell me what you're feeling. And she won't do it. And one thing leads to another, and she becomes interested in the phenomena of a comatose patient, a healthy patient who comes in for nothing, an abortion, and ends up dead. And then she goes and wants to tap some information, which is, it's funny how secretive they are about data in this movie, that tapping a database is illegal, and anymore you can just hit Google and find what you want to find. But in this, they make a big deal, and this is again where the technology fails the movie, because they're not even in XTs yet. This is just dummy terminals on a mainframe. There's no PC. There's nothing. It's just a monochrome display, kind of reading off very coded messages. There's no GUI. There's no internet. It's just a a bunch of numbers popping up on the screen, and you're like, "Ooh, that's interesting." But anyways, in accessing this database, she runs afoul of the head of surgery, Dr. George Harris, played by the legendary Richard Widmark, with his snowy coif of once blonde hair, his somewhat parchment-like tan skin. He's old. He's not in the cowboy movies anymore. He's the head of surgery. And he basically gives her the lowdown. Hey, you broke a state law, and the only reason I'm not firing you is because you're a chick and because you're a competent surgeon. But I'll just take this slip of paper with a bunch of numbers on it, and we'll just pretend it never happened. You gotta see a shrink first, though. Otherwise, you're gone. But go ahead and see the shrink. So she sees the shrink, and he identifies her layers of bullshit that she's got heaped over this Greenlee incident. You know, she's paranoid. She's pissed. She hasn't consciously acknowledged this problem. But that she's probably going to be okay. And so they let her continue. But she's caught a stench in the hospital that, you know, my friend goes in. She's healthy. She's hot. And then she's dead. I just don't get it. And then the next day, she sees Tom Selleck, pre-Magnum PI, who twisted it. You know, he hurt his knee playing football. And all these doctors are talking to him. It's like, hey, it's Magnum PI, and he's got a bad knee, and he's here at our hospital. And sure enough, later in the day, she sees him out there in recovery, dead, brain dead. You know, how can we have Magnum PI if he's brain dead out there, you know, in the recovery room? And now she's freaking out. She's like, 2 healthy patients in 2 days. Again, me trying to do her accent, and I can't do it. It doesn't make sense. And Michael Douglas is like, listen, you know, again, we do 30,000 operations at this place a year. 2 in 2 days is our bad luck. Well, it seems like it's more Thomas Magnum's bad luck because he's the one who's dead. He's like, listen, you know, this thing happened to your best friend, and now you're looking for this situation. But she's finding the situation. The very next day, the exact same thing happens. And so she starts digging, and she runs afoul of the chief of services for the anesthesiologist, Dr. George, played by Rip Torn. And I just love that name. His parents had to be, our last name's Torn. We'll name our son Rip. Rip Torn. You get it? Well, anyways, he's playing the head of anesthesiology, and he's got a rich wife. And he's pissed that she's... There's a lot of people getting mad about someone doing research, you know. I guess you're not allowed to do research back in the 70s. And he says, listen, I know you think there's a conspiracy here at the MEM, but be reasonable. We've had these coma cases, healthy patients, all different doctors, different anesthetists. You know how hard it is for me to say anesthetists? It's hard to say. Different methods of induction, different products used in the induction. If there was a common link, we would know it, because I'm Rip Torn. And of course, that isn't going to satiate Dr. Wheeler. She cannot be satisfied. And later that evening, she says, well, there is a common link, and it's all these unexplained coma cases happened in OR 8, operating room number 8. And you would think Rip Torn and his people would see that, like, hey, we got all these coma cases and they all happened in operating room number 8. Maybe I should hoist a red flag. Maybe there's something wrong with OR 8. But apparently they didn't come up with that piece of logic. We needed Genevieve Bujold to do that. And they go and they check it out, and they can't find anything wrong. And they say, well, on the day your friend Nancy had her problem, you know, there was 4 or 5 other cases, a few before, a few after. And then when Magnum PI ended up croaking, there were 6 other cases, like 2 before and 4 after. So there's, other than it being in the same room, a lot of people came and went and didn't have a problem. And then the next day, she goes to visit her friend, who's still in the intensive care, Nancy, and her bed is empty. And she finds out that she died, and that really pushes her over the edge. She finally, all these layers of bullshit that she's got formed inside as a defense break apart, and she just breaks down. And she finds out that these coma cases that need long-term care usually end up at this place called the Jefferson Institute. And she's like, what's that? What's that? The Jefferson Institute. And then in reviewing all these files, she sees all these cases, including Magnum PI, went to the Jefferson Institute. She's like, huh. Wonder what nefarious doings are happening at this place, at this institute. Just the word institute makes me shudder, gives me the horrors to this day. Well, she's given a few days off to relax and recover, and she and Michael Douglas head out into the quaint Massachusetts, that's hard to say, isn't it? Massachusetts countryside, and they take in some surf and some good seafood. They're shopping in quaint Massachusetts villages, lots of tourists coming and going. They're just having a good old time. And then he's driving like his Ford Falcon down the road, and they pass a sign that says Jefferson Institute and a big arrow pointing off of a side road. And she's like, stop! Can we, just take a quick look? Can we take a quick look, please? And he says, fine. Let's go. And I have to say, there are scenes in movies or books or music that just stay with you throughout your life. And the scene where they're driving down this lonely side road to the Jefferson Institute is one of mine. It's just everything about it, the lonely little road, so far away from the quaint seaside villages they were just enjoying, to the disquieting music by Jerry Goldsmith, God rest his soul, to the sterile and hideous concrete building that's waiting for him at the end of this road. And whenever I see this and I hear this music, it's like, that this place this is the end of the line. This is you when you go to this place, you're not coming back. And every bit about this scene is absolutely brilliant, and you hear this music, and that's the music that was playing as they go to the Jefferson Institute. It's just this lonely concrete building with tinted out windows. And there's nobody around. And even Michael Douglas is creeped out. She's like, when they get there, she's like, "Do you want to go inside?" And he's like, "No, no thanks." Even he can feel the dankness of the area. But Dr. Wheeler is pretty tough. She gets out and goes in. There's no cars in the parking lot. There's nobody around. But eventually, this nurse comes out to talk to her, and the nurse is played by Elizabeth Ashley. And when I saw this movie, I'm like, she's as close to Cruella de Vil as a human being can actually get. She was actually terrifying to me. It's just her manner, just kind of the pre-programmed way she walks. And by God, she does not blink except once in the entire conversation she has with Dr. Wheeler. Her eyes are just fixed on her with no blinking, and there was no CGI to like paint out her blinking like they did with Johnny Depp in Dark Shadows. No, it was Elizabeth Ashley just not blinking. And in seeing her and in doing the talk show circuit and stuff, she's actually a really bubbly, effervescent lady. So her acting skills are on point. This nurse was absolutely terrifying. And Dr. Wheeler's like, "Can I speak to your supervisor?" And she says, "I have no supervisor. Can I see your staff?" "I have no staff." She's basically, I mean, it's as creepy as hell. And eventually she says, "Well, listen, there is a tour on Tuesday, and all will be explained to you then." And so Dr. Wheeler leaves, says, "Okay, I'll come back on Tuesday." And this lady's giving me the horrors. Elizabeth Ashley is. So their fun-filled weekend in the country's over. She's in the lounge, the surgeon's lounge, after a hard day's work. And this maintenance guy, I don't know if he's working on a thermostat or an intercom or something, but while she's there drinking her coffee, she's still in her scrub. He's like, "You're right. I know how it works." And she's like, "Oh, what works?" Because "I know how they do it." He says, "Come on down to maintenance tonight, and I'll show you." Well, she goes down to maintenance, and of course, she witnesses this maintenance guy named, I think his name is Jerry, getting murdered, electrocuted to death by Lance Legault, who's she's noticed has been following her around. She's getting into her car and she sees him, standing off in the distance staring at her. Lance Legault. And later on, she goes back into maintenance and she finds this canister of carbon monoxide. And in talking to the technicians in the morgue, she was asking him, if you were going to kill somebody and you wanted it to be a perfect murder, how would you do it? He says, well, carbon monoxide. It's perfect. It makes it appear like you're fully oxygenated. Your blood is very red, but the entire time your brain is starving, and then after a few minutes your brain dies. CO2, it's odorless, it's colorless, it's tasteless. Carbon monoxide. And she finds a tank of it in the maintenance area, and there's like a tube going off, and she follows it, and she goes up this maintenance core several floors, and she even has to take off her shoes because she's way up high on this ladder, and she follows where the tube is going, and sure enough it goes to like a little radio controlled transmitter. And in checking, lifting up the ceiling tile, she sees she's right next to OR8, and that's how the bad guys are doing it. They have a radio controlled device, and then that they can turn on and turn off this carbon monoxide, so they can kill people whenever they want. Yeah. Yeah. And so at this point, she's not trusting anybody. And then she ends up getting chased pretty much through the entire and apparently abandoned hospital by this hitman, Lance Legault. And she only escapes after unloading a pile of frozen cadavers on him, which is a really cool scene. And she runs back to their apartment and tells Michael Douglas, Mark Bellows, what happened, and how she knows that there's a conspiracy at the MEM. That funky carbon monoxide transmitter didn't get there by itself, and that she can prove it, but she's kind of hysterical. And then he tries to calm her down and makes some tea, and the phone rings, and he gets some weird conversation where he's talking to someone, and she's hearing snatches of the conversation. She's hearing snatches of it, and it sounds like this from this conversation that Mark Bellows is in on the conspiracy with whomever. And when he comes out to give her tea, she's gone. She's out of there. The door's just flapping in the breeze. And she wakes up after a frightful night in a hotel, and then she kind of looks out the window of her hotel, and she's somewhere in Boston, and you just kind of you just get the feeling that I got by seeing that scene where she's looking out the window and there's Boston all around her, that there's just a big formless, shapeless conspiracy just waiting to envelop her. Very effective scene. And then she returns to the Jefferson Institute, and this time there's a bunch of cars there, and there's several doctors receiving this tour from Elizabeth Ashley. And you find out the Institute is an experimental one that's dedicated to the long-term preservation of comatose patients, where they can be kept alive in the hopes that one day they can be brought out of their coma, kind of like freezing people after they're dead. You die of something that there's no cure for right now. You put them on ice until one day there is a cure for whatever happened to them, and then you unfreeze them and bring them back to life. That's basically what the Jefferson Institute is. And then that's where they've got all these bodies hanging from wires from the ceiling. It's basically to prevent them from getting bed sores. pretty iconic scene, seeing these bodies just hanging from the ceiling, on wires. And then Dr. Wheeler, who's not taking no for an answer, who knows there's a conspiracy and that this Jefferson Institute is somehow in on it, kind of breaks away from the group and starts snooping around. And in a side room, she sees Magnum PI. She sees Tom Selleck there, and he's all cut open, and his parts have been removed. And then she discovers the breadth of this conspiracy, that they're basically killing healthy people and auctioning off their healthy parts to parts unknown over the world. And Elizabeth Ashley is apparently a high-level member, and they have got like an auction going on, and they're using T1A key phones with little push buttons and some funky computer that's just spitting out numbers again. And they're taking orders for Tom Selleck's parts. I guess when you've got Magnum PI in your hospital facility, you're gonna want that. You're gonna want to harvest that. So even though they just did it the day before, when you have Magnum PI, you jump on that. And then she finds his emptied out husk there at the Jefferson Institute. And then Elizabeth Ashley, being all evil and so forth, figures out that one of the doctors never left and is roaming about. And they start chasing her, and the action is really good in this scene, where Genevieve Bujold is all by herself in this horrible institute with all these security guys and Elizabeth Ashley after her. And lo and behold, she manages to get away by hiding on top of an ambulance that's there to take away some of the parts that they've sold. And the ambulance drives away, and there she is on top of the ambulance. And makes it back to the hospital, and she tells Richard Widmark all that she knows. He fixes her a drink, and it's like, wow, you've really invested yourself in this problem, and I appreciate it, he says. And as she's sitting there, the room starts to spin, and she sees, everything kind of fading in and fading out, and she realizes that Richard Widmark has drugged her, and sure enough, he is in on it. He is the main conspirator of this organ donation conspiracy. And he goes into this long speech called the long view, where he's trying to rationalize what he's doing, how it's the hospitals are the modern cathedrals of this age, and the doctors are the ones who have to make the hard decisions, and he's making a hard decision in killing people and taking their stuff and selling it. Someone's got to do it, and Richard Widmark is there to do it. It's a pretty convincing speech. If you didn't already know that he was evil incarnate, then you might just fall for that. So anywho, he gives her a drug that simulates acute appendicitis. And she's getting prepped for surgery, and Mark Bellows is there, and he's like, "Why did you run away? I was just talking to your mother. It was your mom. She was worried about you, and I'm worried about you. Where the fuck did you go?" And she says, I don't have appendicitis. She goes, "You do." And he kind of taps her in the side, and she recoils. And she says, "And you're in luck. Dr. George Harris himself is going to perform the procedure. And as they're wheeling her into the operating room, he is insistent that she goes into OR8. And he's not having, they say, well, it's not ready. He says, I specifically demanded OR8. And Mark Bellows hears this, and he realizes what she has been telling him is the truth. And so in she goes. They tube her up, and they start operating, doing this appendicitis. Meanwhile, he follows all the clues that, what she told him about the maintenance core of the hospital and the bottle of carbon monoxide in the tube, and he's following it. He finds her hose that she had to take off while she was on her climb. And sure enough, he eventually finds the transmitter, and it's on. It's pumping in carbon monoxide, but he fucks it up. And then the operation's over, and Dr. Harris is like, well, I don't really see anything wrong with her appendix. And he's pulling off his gloves and pretty satisfied that she is now a brain-dead squash rat. But she starts coughing and coming to, and he's like, whoa, she's coming to, and she's now beyond his grasp, and the door opens, and there's Mark Bellows out there looking at him like he wants to do a Streets of San Francisco maneuver on him, just to give him the old chop socky. And as we fade out, the lights kind of turn off. He said, we're waiting for you, Dr. Harris, and the lights turn off, and he realizes that the jig is up, and he's going to get his, I guess, in the end. So that's Coma, Michael Crichton, 1978, one of the most influential films of my life, probably just because I saw it so many times. It was the first movie I could actually see with my glasses, my new glasses, and one that just really cut deep as far as the theme of the movie is about people putting their blind faith in doctors and in medicine, and the presence of conspiracies. And people like Elizabeth Ashley who don't blink and want to sell your shit. And crappy, outdated 70s technology that, thankfully is gone. Again, a fairly forgotten movie. It was remade 4 or 5 years ago. The remake sucks. Of course it sucks. It was terrible. Had nothing of the innovation of the original, but it had all the modern day politics and SJW agenda that you expect. And that's what made this movie, for me, so amazing, is you have a female protagonist playing a typically male role, but it's done in a way you don't notice it. There's nothing thrown in your face. There's no politics being preached. It was just an exciting movie. And she played a character that you were on her side. You were rooting for. You wanted her to be successful. You admired her determination to see this problem through to the end, to overcome, and which she did. Again, Coma, 1978, starred Genevieve Bujold, Michael Douglas, Richard Widmark, an unknown Tom Selleck, who he wasn't alive very long. Lois Child, she also wasn't alive very long. I highly recommend you see it, and maybe it'll have the same impact on you that it had on me back in 1978. So, this is Ren Presents. I am Ren. Until next time, don't have your parts sold on eBay.